Yeah, that might help.
Is Greg on some sort of chat that we can?
I don't know.
I can. This is Glyn here. I can chat to Greg on Slack if necessary.
All right. So the missing clue seems to be that his username is his email address.
Okay. Okay, send him a message. No response yet.
Okay.
Let's invest a minute or two in this. I'd like to have Greg on board.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe we can start finding note takers and things like that.
Well, let's give it one more minute and see if we can get Greg.
Yeah, he says that he has tried using his email address as his username. It's not working. He says he's got 2 saved passwords and neither of them work.
It's similar to my problems, but finally it worked. I can't tell exactly what it was.
Is it possible to reset the password fairly easily?
Francesca, do you know any magic?
It's possible, but it lasts about 2 minutes.
Oh, okay.
If you get
email, he said he tried to reset, but it says it can't find his account.
Oh.
And he can't make a new one? Most of us have lots of email addresses.
Yeah, he said, I don't have permission to create. I'm just relaying his email here, which you all have, by the way.
Yeah, he's just put an image up of password reset. And it says, didn't find a matching account. If you don't have an account, you can find one. So it's looking a bit difficult.
Can he telephone in?
No, I don't know his number.
No. Can he join the conference call by telephone?
Okay, I'll ask him.
So did you accept the slides?
Yes.
Okay, he says how. Are there telephone numbers somewhere in the emails?
It's not showing me the slides.
Yeah, has anyone got a telephone number that Greg can dial?
I'm looking.
Thanks. Yeah, he's a bit concerned about spending 2 hours on an international call, but I'm hopeful there'll be a free number. Or a local number at least.
Well,
I'm not sure how much this helps, but he does have a data tracker account under his Yahoo email address.
okay, if we could pass that on, but you know, we're going to have to get going here, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think so. All right, shall we?
Let's go.
I'll tell him the bad news.
Okay. Okay, so let's get started. I'm just going to crack through it. This is the note well. This is an IETF meeting. You should all note well, but just in case, I've got to say it. You've got to hear it. Administrator, do we have somebody who can do note taking? Failing that, we can do what was done last time, where I just captured it in the VOD afterwards. But we should probably have somebody doing it instead. Any takers? No? Okay, I'll do it with the VOD once it's available. But we should probably, Tim, between us, we should probably keep notes of any actions that need to be specified, or at least say them clearly so that we don't lose track.
Yes, I will also do the basic note taking.
Thank you, Tim. Blue sheet, I'm fairly certain that because this is a Meet Echo call that's automatically generated, that's what usually happens. Is that the case?
That's correct.
Okay, so I don't have to deal with that. JavaScribe, I'll watch Java, so I don't think we have anybody additional that's exclusively in Java, so that shouldn't be a problem. Is there any agenda batching or anything in particular that people want to make sure that we talk about?
This is Tim. Let me just make one remark quickly. First of all, hold on a second. Let me find the. Yeah, Marco. That's right. Marco has resigned his editorship. Now, as we know, in fact, all the editorial work has been done by Karsten and Glenn and Stefan. We thank them for that. That's great. We really appreciate the support. James and I haven't had a chance to talk this over yet. We'll figure it out. But Marco will no longer be with us in that capacity. As for the agenda, should we, Karsten, at this point, should we ask you to? I gather you have been pulling together issues.
Yes, I actually have some slides that are not strictly in issue order, because right now our main problem seems to be digesting these monster pull requests.
You.
So yes, I think we have consensus that in future the pull requests should be smaller and more surgical. please. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to share my slides. Sorry, this is so slow, but there's something very interesting going on with macOS here.
Yeah, I saw your slides earlier.
Yes. And I'm just trying to put them up again. And it will happen, but it takes a little time.
Just
Because
while
Chrome
we're
always-
waiting,
Pardon me?
just while we're waiting, a suggestion is if someone needs to put up a large pull request, and it may be that's no longer needed, but if someone needs to, they can also put up a draft pull request for comments and then pull it apart into surgical small pull requests for merging.
Is it is it still necessary to break it down to a smaller set of pull requests?
Well, the problem is that big pull request essentially gets in the way of finishing any pull requests that are still outstanding, and essentially blocks putting in any new pull requests. So I think we should really try to avoid those.
Trying to avoid that in future is okay, but my pull request break it down to
No. I think what we should be doing at this point
Greg is
is
here.
finish the current pull request, because that already has pushed aside everything else. So we can finish that now. and I'm dreaming that we can merge it today, so we can then start creating little pull requests on specific issues, because I'm already dying to make a few of those, but I'm not going to muddy the water further by doing this right now. So my hope is we can merge 102 today.
Thanks a lot, Carsten, for doing this.
Yeah, thank you, Karsten, for all this work. Okay, we see your screen, Karsten.
Great. So let's quickly talk about 97.
Sorry, real quick, on what we were just talking about, number 102, I did put in a few comments. I don't know if you looked through those. And then there's also other
When?
stuff. Maybe a couple hours ago. Looks like
Okay,
you've responded.
I think I have covered everything that came in until 8 world time.
Okay.
But yeah, there are lots of comments in there that really need to lead to further pull requests. So we cannot simply tick these off. All three, 98, 99, and 102, have comments that we still have to act on. But that's just not productive to try to tweak the big pull request. We have to act on these things in small pull requests.
And Greg, I'm glad you managed to fight your way through and get on.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about the one thing that's remaining of 97, and that's the definition of the term string. And I think the underlying problem is that we are basing our terminology on that of 8259, which really has been written to define what a JSON text is. So it was not possible for political reasons to actually fix this document to talk about the data. So it talks about the text. And so it doesn't even have a definition section, but the definitions that are in the text essentially define how the JSON text looks for something, and not how the JSON values look like. So the example that's on this slide here with the various numbers, this is all the same number. So from the point of view of JSON path, there is no difference between these 7 constants here. But of course, the numbers look different. So it's important to keep in our mind whether we are talking about a literal or we are talking about the number that is the data behind that literal. And that becomes important now because we are defining string literals that actually are different from those of JSON. All other literals, it seems, I don't know if that's actually true, but to me it seems all other literals look the same. But strings have extensions with respect to JSON. So our string literals are different from the JSON string literals. And so we have to be careful about defining things. So specifically talking about strings.
So
go ahead.
The discussion that we had last time was that we wanted to use values. And that's what this PR does. This PR uses the term values. We never considered using the word literals anytime with until you brought it up like a few days ago. And no discussion has been around the word literal until you brought it up. And so my question is, can we take the PR as it is for what we discussed and then use another PR to change it for these literals?
Just to be clear, that I understand, are we talking here about literal things such as member names, arguments in a JSON path expression?
Yes.
So I say foo square bracket single quotes bar. And
Yes.
It's the bar we're talking about here?
Yes. So the value of that thing is a string. We don't have to do anything new here because the data type string is well, kind of defined in 8259. But the new thing, of course, is that the literal that we are accepting for strings is more permissive than the literal provided by JSON. What the remaining part of PR97 actually does is redefine string, and that would be read as redefining string values as the literal. And that doesn't make sense. So that's why I think we really have to separate these two aspects clearly. I think so far it didn't really matter, but as soon as we actually have specific literal syntax in JSON path that differs from the one we import from 8259, we have to be careful here. And I'm not wedded to the term literal. That has just been the term that has been used for the last 45 years or so. But we can also say notation or something else. So if you don't like literal for any reason, we can find a term here. But the important thing is distinguishing the notation from the value.
I'm fine with the term literal. I understand it. I guess my question is, I'm still fuzzy on the distinction you have between a literal and the value. Is the value for instance, if you have the word foo in quotes or in double quotes versus single quotes, are those two different literals, or are they the same literal?
They're obviously different because one has single quotes and one has double quotes, but the value behind that is the same. And the same thing on this
so
slide.
it doesn't really make sense to me to talk about the value in that case. And so in my PR, when I say string, I'm talking about the literal.
Yes,
throughout
but
the PR.
then later on we talk about comparing strings, and we are definitely not comparing string literals in any way or fashion. in JSON path. So that would be a highly misleading way to describe it. We're always comparing values.
All right. Well, my PR doesn't necessarily do that, though. My PR doesn't look at comparisons. Stefan's PR does later when he's talking about expressions.
But when expressions are evaluated, there should only be values, no literals. We have the same number, which is 10, if we compare the value with Carsten's number example.
Okay. Yeah, see, none of this was discussed in the last meeting, and so that's why none of this is represented in my PR.
So, obviously the process of applying a JSON path expression involves comparing, the numbers and strings in the expression to those found in the argument. It's not obvious what we're disagreeing on here to me.
My frustration primarily is the fact that I had a PR up for almost a month, and this issue with the PR is just now coming to light with, a few days before this meeting.
Okay, well, that's okay. Frustration acknowledged, but can we talk about what is the core of the issue? What I'm looking, the PRs are big and complicated, and I'm having trouble finding what is the issue that we disagree on here? What consensus are we looking for?
So it sounds like for the purposes of expressions, we want to make a distinction between how it's represented, which is the literal, and the value behind it, which is what's actually going to be used in the expressions. And maybe that can be extended to indexes, for example, where we use the square brackets with a quotation or with a string literal quotations as well. But I don't know, do I need to rework this PR to account for this difference that has just recently come to light?
Well, let's look at the PR for a second. Let me just paste that into the slides. So this is essentially the remainder of the PR. Everything else already has been merged. And this defines string. After saying we import number, object, array, and so on from 8259, this defines string as this. And I'm sorry, but this is wrong. This is a string literal. This is not a string.
This is the representation of a string in a JSON path expression. And
yes.
what is being represented is the usual sequence of Unicode code points.
Exactly.
And the only escaping that is required is that of the delimiter.
Yeah, well, whether it's required or not is not important. You can have all kinds of escaping in a string literal. So we have to explain the process how the string literal turns into a string that can then be used in the JSON path query. And this talks about the literal and only to a very small part. So it's also not really a very useful definition because it doesn't say what escaping is, and it doesn't say that you actually can escape other things as well, and that you have the backslash U things and so on.
To that end, right. I'm happy taking Stefan's his breakdown of what the string is from his PR and reusing and using that for a string literal.
Basically, I was reusing Glenn's definition.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is we don't need this definition because we have a definition of string in 8259. So we can import that like we import number and array and object. And then, of course, at some point in the text, there's ABNF for how we actually notate strings. And I also have a suggestion how to change that, but that's not the subject right now. But I think we can simply lose this particular pull request.
Just sorry for clarity. This is not something I'd ever wrestled with before. But in a JSON path expression, does it adopt the escaping mechanisms of 8259? You know, the stupid \u UTF-16 expressions.
That's what we currently say. So it's essentially a superset of what 8259 allows for a string, literal.
Okay, so I hear a concrete proposal that we adopt the definition in from Glenn's.
I think it was Stefan's originally. Whatever the expression one is.
Last thing, Carsten proposed to extract the literal definitions and put it to a special section. Might be make sense before the other definitions. Is this correct, Carsten?
Yeah, let's merge 102 first. But I think one of the next projects will be separating out the expression language from the way it is used in the various selectors. And part of that, of course, will be defining the literal aspect of the expression language.
Okay.
So there's lots of other syntax that needs to be defined, and we can define the literal syntax with that, so that the selectors can really focus on just saying how you line up the selectors and what the individual kinds of selectors actually mean.
Mm-hmm.
But again, this is about the definition section. It's not about the sections that actually specify things. It's just the definition. And again, my proposal is to import string with the other 8259 terms and do not do what the remaining parts of this pull request are proposing. I mean, tons of stuff has been merged, so we're mostly done with this pull request. But that's the one thing that couldn't be merged.
Are people comfortable with that approach?
We need to add in at some point the string literal from the expressions or a variant thereof. But that needs to go up into... Does that need to go in terminology, or are we going to have an ANBF section somewhere?
Well, the ABNF is right now smeared over the text. So whenever we introduce a new concept, we have a little bit of ABNF going with that. And at some point, we probably want to consolidate that into an appendix as well. But right now, it's easier to just keep the smeared ABNF.
Right. I understand that. But for right now, it's specifically targeting the member name, I believe, in the indexer. So whenever you have a named indexer, then that's where that is. And if we allow string literals in expressions, then the names that we have in there don't necessarily make sense. For example, commented on it. I have to find it. Give me a second, I'm sorry. I commented on 89, I believe. Or not 89, 98.
So this is the current text that has the ABNF. And indeed, what is called quoted member name here would be the string
Oh, yeah.
literal.
Yeah, quoted member name. It's not all, if we have string expressions, or if we have string literals in expressions, quoted member name isn't going to necessarily make sense for that. So I would suggest changing that to string content or encoded string or something.
Yeah, ECMA 262 calls it string literal.
Yeah. That would be fine.
This makes sense.
So I also have some potential text that can clarify the hexstick thing here below, and I could make a pull request that just addresses the string literal ABNF.
Fine.
So there's one thing that was said earlier. Karsten, you said it was a superset of what's in A259. In what sense is that?
It uses single quotes, and
Oh,
I haven't checked everything else. So I think we at some point we need to actually look at implementations. For instance, if there is a \eggs in a string literal, what do implementations do there? The ECMAScript string literals are even more permissive. So they would actually have a definition of what the \eggs means, while JSON simply rejects the \eggs because it's not defined. And we have to find our position on that continuum. We probably don't want to have all the ECMAScript stuff in there, but we probably want to be a little bit more permissive to be able to accept existing queries.
In my experience, JSON paths always appeared as string values in JSON documents. So all the escaping that you needed to do was done by the JSON parser. So the notion of separate escaping specifically for JSON path, it never, to be honest, I'd never actually seen it.
Well, that's actually interesting because, for instance, if you have a \n somewhere in your expression, if the JSON parser already does one level of unescaping, then what the string literal parser for JSON path will see is a new line, and right now it will choke
Correct.
about that.
And
I think
I've actually seen \n
yes for
that reason. Very commonly in GraphQL APIs as well, where they're trying to encode JSON content in the response, which is also JSON. So double escaping is not an uncommon thing.
Okay, so I think I understand the way forward now.
Okay, so we'll look for. So we've got an action item for Karsten to do a PR around the string ABNF. Thank you in advance. Should we move along?
Yes.
Do we need to just agree that I forget which the PR number was, I get confused by all these PRs, but the one that Greg was working on, can that now be closed if that was the only outstanding bit and we've merged all the rest?
Well, that's your discretion as the editors, but that would be
There was,
my recommendation.
yeah, there was one niggly bit that I had on line 430 where I had changed a self-referential JSON path to the word query, but I can let that go.
Yeah, that should be in 102. Did you check that?
It would be, well, it won't be on 436 anymore. I'll check that.
Okay, but it sounds like you're comfortable with closing that one, and then you could always raise another PR for that one change.
Yeah, that's fine.
The fewer PRs that are in flight, the better from our perspective, because it's boggling. Thank you.
Well, we are going to have this discussion here, but I think we need to actually attack it from different angles. So with that, let's talk about 98, which is Stefan's giant PR. And that actually comes in three flavors, 98, 99, which was a fix so that it actually builds, and then 102, which is a rebase on the 101, which came out of 97. So the one we actually should be working on now is 102. And there are a number of issues actually uncovered by this PR, which we don't necessarily all have to answer before we merge 102, but we need to be aware of. And so one thing that came up in various places is what is the amount of power that we actually want to give to the expression language. So one discussion was on whether we should have arithmetic operators. And I on purpose put the percent sign here because it's not the first one that comes to mind, but it's the typical thing that will come up when you start doing things like you give me every third entry and something like that. The second question was, should we have function calls? So the PR currently has parts of the syntax for a function call, but I'm not even sure, is that actually you? Do we define a function yet in the PR? So that's something I'm raising the issues. I have slides for the individual issues later. And the third one was, can we actually juggle with structured values? So the term that 8259 uses for containers is structured values, and the term it uses for the atomic values is primitive values. And again, I would propose to using the 8259 terms, even if I wouldn't have chosen them, but that's what we have.
Structured values means arrays and objects, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Currently, we only have comparison operations in the PR, and I do not see the use case for arithmetic operations. I'm afraid about the fact that it might become quite complex in this sense of you you start with the addition operator. Should it work only for numbers, or should it also work for strings? If it works for numbers, why not add all members of an array? And why not divide the result by the count of the numbers in this array, resulting in median? And so you approximating the median arithmetic. I'm afraid about the fact that it gets quite complex very fast. So I propose to start first with the comparison operators only.
I'm fine with it.
I've never worked with an
Iterative.
implementation that has math. Has anybody worked with such an implementation?
A JSON path is.
Say that again.
Are there implementations out there that support arithmetic operations in?
Mine does.
I think most do, because they just delegate to the underlying scripting engine, and that scripting engine, of course, has some form of arithmetic, but it's not really defined what that arithmetic is.
Right.
So the work we would need to do is, for those cases where it's actually defined, we have to be very specific what we mean by these. So, for instance, comparison. If anybody here thinks that comparison is simple, think about Unicode normalization, think about floating point comparison. There's lots of booby traps there already. So arithmetic kind of seems like a slam dunk compared to that. But I think we can keep that open. Maybe that's not something we have to define right now. But of course, where we have examples that already use arithmetic or structured values and so on, we have to decide whether we keep them or whether we mark them with not really supported yet. Let's see whether we will, or something like that.
My question about some of these features is, do they pull their weight? You know, I can see that they have use cases, and we can invent use cases if we want to, but are they really generally useful compared to the amount of complexity that they introduce, both for the implementer and for the user, you know, the reader of the spec?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to push back on the assertion that comparison is complex. You know, when it comes to strings, you have a sequence of Unicode code points. Any suggestion that people should do, you know, NFC normalization, sorry, normalization, please, you know, let's not go there. You know, as regards numbers, you know, 8259 says what you can expect is, you know, IEEE 754 doubles, and that's all you can expect. And given, you know, those base assumptions, I just don't really believe that you know, comparison is that big a deal. So I think that saying arithmetic is a slam dunk and compared to comparison, I'm unconvinced.
So normalization is really interesting because the only place where normalization actually makes sense is comparison. It has taken a while before people started to understand that. So originally people were slapping NFC on everything. Whenever they had a data value in the hand, they just normalized that as a matter of course. And that has turned out to be the wrong way of doing it. So the only place where you actually want to have normalization around is in comparison. So no, I think we have to address normalization when we want to support string comparison.
Okay.
It was not my intention to say that comparison is easy and arithmetic is complex, but JSON path is for selecting things out of the JSON text, and for this you need comparison for the first place. You ask for a special path, and maybe you can compare a value with a given value for selecting, and this is what we need for filters, just comparison on the first place, in the first place.
So
regarding, okay.
I'm
go ahead, Stefan.
the comparisons and Boolean operators, or even just comparisons as a first go, and then in subsequent PRs adding this extended functionality.
I like a lot the concept of Carsten with its so-called extension points. Wouldn't it be an argument to put arithmetic operations to these extension points? I must confess I didn't completely understand the extension point complex concept.
The idea behind an extension point is that when you parse a JSON path expression, you can find out whether an extension point has been used, and look up whether your implementation supports that extension point, and then apply the implementation. So it's a framework in which extensions can be put in without destroying the rest. And arithmetic, of course, could be added in a functional notation. Then it would be easy to just make the whole functional notation an extension point. That's actually what we did in CGDL, where we have the control operator concept, and so we made it a functional extension. And that would be one way of doing it. I'm not saying that I prefer that or I dislike that, but that's certainly one approach.
Actually, I had your extension point concept in mind when I tried to propose the function concept. Let's discuss it. It's an extension to the current PR. We can leave it out. But there are some edge cases maybe where you need it. I'm not sure. It's a handful cases. It's not so important.
I think for the purposes of this PR, leaving functions out is good, but we should definitely revisit it.
Okay.
I think that to your point of extensibility, I think that you need to be able to parse the expression, and having arithmetic operations in there seems like having that defined by the spec seems something like we should be able to have some kind of operator that works between values that way. And that maybe isn't a good extension point, but function calls is a great extension point, because extensions can define new functions, etc. And all those functions could have a similar syntax. A name, and then a set of arguments and surrounded by parentheses, for example. I think all of this stuff is something that we can, or at least the first two, is something that we can possibly come back to in another PR. I don't know that it's necessary to have these things for this PR.
So as I said, I have not managed to figure out all the parts of the different PRs. So I think what you're saying is that the expression language should at the moment simply cover comparisons, equality and inequality.
I think
Yes.
It makes sense to start with just comparison, and as Greg proposes in one of the next PRs, we should discuss more deeper arithmetic operations and or function calls. Function calls, the next aspect which comes to my mind is, can functions receive only one argument or multiple arguments. Okay. For
So does anybody,
in the future,
I smell consensus here. So do I generally perceive consensus that we should be minimal in this respect for this PR?
I think so.
Okay, not hearing any objections. Good. Ooh, Karsten, what do you, we hadn't finished that slide yet. Where are you going?
Well, I was just trying to find out what we just decided. So this is what we will have to change to actually do what we just said. And I just would like to hear what people think we should be doing with this. So should we throw out the logical operators?
yes.
I think we should definitely take out the calc val on the second last line.
Mm-hmm. Which gets rid of func as well.
The two last lines and calc value, calculated value also.
Yeah. So if you look at all of that, you can get rid of probably the negation operator, the logical operator, the calc val, and func. Is the in operator something that we want to keep for right now? Is that a comparison? It does return a Boolean, I suppose.
It's a comparison because you can always take every element of an array and compare it with it with the value in question. So it's a shortcut for or syntactical shortcut.
Okay.
The question is if we are allowed to apply the in operator for arrays, okay, but also for objects in programming languages, you have the has operator instead. Object has key, and color is in array, color array.
In this respect, C. Bergmer's comparison is interesting. You know, he looks at filter expression with greater than equals. In is actually explicitly called out there.
No. The most important logical expression is the existence. If we type in @key, it means true only if that key exists in object. So this the implied Boolean value, and only for this reason you need the not operator or the negation operator. Just to test if @key has the value false, the Boolean value false, you must explicitly have a way to test it for false. You can do it by equal false, but you can also use the negation operator. And there is a table that complies mostly to JavaScript, how the not operator works with strings. Empty string is false. Together with a negation operator, the number 0 and the Boolean value false and null, and that's it. I think. Empty arrays and empty objects are always true. Does anybody think we do not need the not operator?
Well, I think it's almost certain that we will add it back if we take it out now. So we might as well leave it in.
I would have said the same for or and actually, the logical operators. We're probably better to have them back in.
You can group
Right,
it
but
by
that makes your
parentheses.
expressions quite more complex.
A point about the inop, it seems to drag in the decision about whether we allow structured literals. So I wonder if it's worth deferring inop until that point.
Yes, that's right.
Sorry, pardon me for being dumb, but explain why. I mean, I would assume that what you're testing is membership in a part of the argument.
Not necessarily. You could say that a particular value is in one of a static list. Like say you
Yeah,
had an enum, and you want to make sure that you only pick up values in your array that are valid for that enum.
Yeah, but in principle, you could retain in, but not have such literals. It would still be useful.
True.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Pardon me for being pedantic. So I think I'm smelling consensus that for the current step, we would leave out the function part and anything related to that, and then basically retain everything else that's in here.
But my view would be slightly different. I would simply leave it in so we can merge this thing today and then fix it later. We don't have to run a regime here where everything that is in the document is cast in stone. We can still fix it. So
Yes, so speaking under my chair hat, I'm always smelling. Do we have consensus here? Can we settle this thing? I'm in favor of taking things out.
I'm a bit uncomfortable still with in because I think it seems to sneak in comparison with structured values, which I think we need to discuss separately.
Well, we just talked about two use cases, and the one on top needs structured values, the one in the bottom doesn't.
Yeah. So it depends what container means on the previous slide.
Yes. And we haven't defined that yet, so we have a well-defined hole.
Yeah.
I think the first line is okay, but the second one, don't we have something like the left-hand side in such comparison expressions? Must
Yeah.
not the expression containing the @ symbol always be on the left side?
I don't see that as a requirement.
Yeah, so this is actually a lot of cheating here because add.foo actually is a node list. And we haven't really said how we would manage node lists in this place. So there's quite a bit of design work to be done to make the second case work as well.
Yeah, and this particular operator is actually quite unique from, say, the equality operator in that the left side takes a single value and the right side contains it must be a container or an array. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to have it the other way around, whereas equality, A equals B, then B equals A. So
I think
this
we have
particular operator is unique in that.
We have two paths forward. One is to adopt basically the whole screen full of stuff, simply because that allows the merge to proceed, and we get a single document that we can work on. The other is to drop a few of these things now. I am not particularly religious on either path forward.
Maybe
I hesitate to keep stuff that we're not yet comfortable with.
So with the same argument, we dropped out functions for now. I think it might be also a complex thing, this in operator. So with the same argument, we should throw it out for now and rediscuss it for maybe later pull requests.
I think so.
Okay, so
Karsten, is that okay with you?
Yeah, but it just needs to be done, because saying that let's do that doesn't mean that it's actually done. So let me just try doing this. So we just took out the calcvel, we took out func, we took out the inop. I will fill in the punctuation here. So this is gone. What else do we want to go? Calcvel is going away. Inop is going away.
No, I don't want to go have it go away. Just to discuss in a later PR. It needs more evaluation, I think.
Right. But I think if we don't know exactly what it does, then it shouldn't go in the PR.
That's where I
Same
have
with
a different procedure in mind.
Okay.
So I don't think we always have to work below the waterline. So we might have things in our document where we don't quite know how it works, but we still say how it works together with everything else once we have defined how it works. And if we always cut away everything that is not defined, then we have an essentially empty document most of the time, because there's always one detail that isn't defined yet.
Okay.
Glenn, how does that work with the with your implementation and the compliance test suite?
Yeah, I've always said the implementation will lag well behind the spec. So it would have to lag even further behind the spec, so I can be sure when the dust has settled. It does make it tricky. But the compliance test suite is hopeless, because I don't know when to start work on a feature.
Okay, I will try to collect some use cases for the in operator and try to find in the context of existing implementations. I have in mind, I have read about in operator somewhere, and this was the inspiration automatically for this. Okay. So
I'm going to do a
I now vote for let
on.
it in and do some investigation about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a deep dive on Stack Overflow.
I'm a minimalist, but I'm a kind of a friend of the in operator. I think it's really easy to understand what it's trying to do, and it doesn't seem to introduce a lot of complexity. So, Karsten, are you at peace with what's on the screen now?
Yeah, because I can paste that into the PR and have it ready in 1 hour.
So we still have calcval in there, which isn't defined.
We have what?
Calcval under CompExpr.
Yeah, thanks, Mr.
If we extract the expression language, then we extract everything beginning from logical expression. Is this right? Because you were proposing extracting the expression language. And
yeah, so I think the boundary can be discussed where that exactly is, but I would consider a Boolean expression to be part of the expression language. But on the other hand, there are some things here like the dot selector and index selector where the expression language then grabs back into the selector syntax.
Okay, this makes sense. It's okay to have a section expression language, and it can be extended. Extension points can be later added. It's okay. It's quite a good concept, I think.
Just looking at the logical operators, we don't seem to have any. Maybe got the syntax wrong, but I can't see a way of grouping together disjuncts inside brackets, or maybe defining. Maybe we need to define the precedence of and or, but ignoring that for the moment. If you want to have explicit brackets, I don't think there's a syntax for that.
Logical expression contains parentheses, so you can do grouping.
Right, but where is logical expression used inside inside itself? Where's the recursion that allows you to get two pairs of nested brackets, for example?
You can combine comparison expressions with logical operators, and that's it.
Okay.
So this explicitly does not support arbitrarily recursive expressions.
Right, logical expression needs to be used within itself in order to be able to have other expressions internally with parentheses.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if there's an argument here for omitting logical expressions from this PR and bringing them back with the full power in a later PR. I'm in favor of them, by the way, but I think they need to be done right, as it were.
Yeah, I think we can use the syntax out of ECMA 262 and simply compress this down to the parts that we actually need. So I think that should be an easy exercise, and I can do this after this meeting.
Okay.
So are you saying that you will beef up logical operators in this PR or delete them?
Yes.
Which?
Boolean expression is multiple logical expressions, so you can combine multiple expressions with parentheses.
Yeah, but that doesn't make sense.
Okay. Okay.
I don't think that the whole gamut of potential expansions of this actually makes sense. So I think a more traditional way of nesting things would be easier to get right.
Okay.
Right, so I'm still not clear, Carsten. Are you proposing to sort out that problem in this PR? Yes. Or yes. To delete? Or yes, you are. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've arrived at a point where we have an action item which Carsten has volunteered for. Thank you. And I think we have some expectations of what we're going to get from it. And why don't we let him loose to do that? And see what we get.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think we covered about 2/3 of my remaining slides already. Yeah, so comparing with structured values, I think that's on the to-do list. We will do that later. So don't do it now. Right?
Whenever I see these things, I immediately flip over to Seabergmer's thing to see, is this thing something that's already being done? My quick read is that it's not. So anyhow, yes, let's take it up later.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll reiterate, my implementation does support any JSON literal.
Yeah. So I think the decision should be, it's not in the PR today. The decision should not be, we will never ever look at comparison with structured values again, because I don't think we have the data for that really assembled yet.
And what we need then is a focused PR. For the person who thinks that we need this, needs to make a focused PR covering explicitly that and nothing else. So that'll give us a nice clean argument to have.
Okay. So I think we, yeah, there's one thing that I already mentioned, but want to mention again. So we have had this terminology problem that we need to distinguish atomic from complex or simple from structured or whatever. And given that 8259 uses primitive and structured, my proposal is that we use that pair of terms.
Okay.
And that doesn't
Sounds
mean
good.
that container is going away, because container is still a useful concept for not the whole subtree, but just the level at which the container is situated. But I think if we are talking about the whole trees, then we have primitive trees, which are essentially leaves, and structured trees, which are structured. Okay, then we had the discussion about selecting a value versus selecting a node. That's one more terminology problem that we haven't fully understood yet. And the text currently mostly talks about selecting a value, but I think it actually should be saying we are selecting nodes, because we are not just selecting the value, we are also selecting the position in the argument.
As I recall our previous discussion, the distinction becomes important
from that.
if you plan to use this to update the argument.
Yeah, but whenever you need a pointer into the argument as a return value of the JSON path query. And updating is one case, but there may be other cases where it's useful to have that pointer.
By the way, we lost your screen, Kirsten.
You did. Why? So you have to grant me permission.
We have the
here
concept.
it says a screen share is being started. So
Yes. So keep talking. It will be there again in 15 seconds.
With JSON path, we have the concept to return the result in form of JSON path normalized expressions. And for this, in fact, you need the nodes, the name or index and the value, and you don't need the value. But with the index, name, or the complete path, you can always get the value. So this is a superior concept a superior notation, so I'm fine with the rule always talking about selecting a node instead of selecting a value.
Selecting a node seems right to me.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I'm going to remain silent. In my experience, 100% of the times I've used JSON path is just to extract values. So,
Well, you can get values. That's fine, because values are a portion of the node. The node is the value plus its location. So if you select nodes and you request that only values are returned, then that's fine.
I would suggest that the draft needs a paragraph explaining why we're talking about nodes, not just values. Maybe even illustrating it with a use case, an example of.
I think that was part of my PR actually, which is now part of 102.
Oh, if we already have that, that would be excellent.
Yeah, because I initially added node and node list based on our previous discussion, and then it looks like that was rolled into what Karsten did for 102.
Does anybody disagree with this approach?
No, I'm fine with define this concept and the concept of node versus value, and it's much important to understand if you get the value 5 by an JSON path expression, you cannot apply that expression once again. If you do not have, of course you can apply the query again, but you cannot tell if you have the number 5 from where exactly in the document it is. But if you have the path, the normalized path, you can do it. This is only possible using nodes. And this is what we need to explain carefully, yes.
Right. You need to motivate it. Yep. Fair enough.
Okay.
I think we can move on.
Yep. Oh, dot one.
My initial reaction to this is not to allow it. I think it should start with a letter.
I
But
agree, and I think
that's-
I think the finding is that if you're being careful at all, you're going to use quoted string selectors in almost all cases anyhow, just to deal with the situation that member names can have dots in them, which will really screw you up. So if you're going to be so foolish as to use something that might look like a digit, put it in quotes so it's clear what you mean.
It also complies to most programming languages who do not allow to start a variable by a digit.
Now, one of the nice things about JSON is that it's not fussy what the member names are, which can be super valuable. But that means people using JSON paths should be careful. Should not assume they can just emit from their code A.B.C and expect it to work.
But they already have to be careful with embedded question marks and minus signs and so on. So
yeah,
that is not a significant further complication. Good.
Tim, to to your
Now,
point, if you go see Ian Berger's the comparison chart, he does have a few test cases where they actually have dots in the keys. So you get, dot A, dot B, and some implementations will actually pull out an A dot B key if it's present, and there's not an A key. So some implementations do actually support that, and I find that very strange.
Well, I find that broken. It's just broken.
I mean, so this is, so if we were to assert that a dot member name cannot start with a digit, you're stepping on a slippery slope. You could say, okay, well, it has to match the ECMAScript name production, which we actually did in an implementation where we were sanity checking JSON scripts, JSON paths before we applied them, and we rejected those that did not match the ECMAScript name production, which actually worked pretty well. Because just saying you can't start with a digit feels a little bit incomplete. I mean, you know, if you can't start with a digit, I would also expect you to not be able to start with a dot or a hyphen or a percent sign or, lots of other things too. Or a plus sign, etc.
Yeah, I mean, my reaction to that question, what does .1 apply to an array mean, was, well, we're applying a .child member child to an array, so it doesn't select any nodes. It's easy. I didn't expect .1 to pick out a member of an array.
You still read that?
Say again?
Can you still read that?
Yes.
It should be dot member first and dot member character or
sure,
something like that.
That looks to me like the ECMAScript name production. Is in fact that it?
For dot selector, we need this, yes, but you can always use the more universal index selector instead.
Right. Bracket selector, yeah.
I think the ECMAScript production is way more complicated because they only allow.
Actually, I think you're right.
Allow letters in the names.
Yeah, I think you're right. Anyhow, I'd be okay with this.
Okay, so I will clean this up. This is certainly not the final form of that, but please put an action point for me in there. So next.
Okay, the concept is pragmatically a union. Why a union can contain every other selector, but there are collectors that should be only used once. If it is the wildcard or the descendant selector. No, that was another concept I had in mind. might be discussed controversially.
I think the wildcard and the filter selection would work here, but I don't think the descendant would unless you came up with a different syntax that worked inside the brackets. Because the descendant selector only works outside of the brackets.
Yes, I agree completely with descendant selector not being allowed inside of the union selector. And then what about wildcards?
The wildcards are in there right now, so I don't know why you raised that question.
It's something that I brought up in the PR.
Okay.
The wild card as it's defined in the union as it's defined in the PR, which I think you have here, does not include wildcards. And from a logistic point of view, I can't see why you would want to put wildcard in with something else, like with another type of selector, but I can't see any reason to specifically disallow it. So I don't know.
If we disallow the descendant selector, we restrict the union selector on one level of object or array level. Is that correct? So the wildcard selects all. So the wildcard doesn't need to be inside of the brackets. And it doesn't need to be combined with other selectors logically.
Right.
So the next question would be, should we disallow it explicitly for this logical reason or keep it inside for stupid users? I don't know. From my
Yeah, because as
point
soon
of
as
view,
you've included the wildcard, then all of the other selectors become redundant.
yes.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it is.
From that point of view, it makes sense to disallow wildcard to be combined with anything else.
This was my
I'm going to refresh again. I'll
my
be right back.
thinking is.
I think I agree with what's been said. I think the only reason for keeping wildcard in there is for uniformity, so that you can say, you can make general statements about unions being like single values. If you allow square brackets with a wildcard inside, then
Yes,
is that a degenerate form of a union without a comma? Yeah, so it's a uniformity thing for me.
Yeah, it's
but I don't feel strong.
Particularly a syntactical ambiguity thing, because the way it's currently written, it's not quite clear whether you enter into a union selector or into a what's the other thing called? Selector.
An index.
Yeah.
Okay, the union selector containing a single wildcard is the index wildcard selector, and combining it with any other doesn't make sense. And Glyn argues for conformity with the others. Okay.
Yeah, but don't forget, I don't feel strongly, so I'm happy to go with this. I was just raising the other arguments.
Greg also mentioned the fact that this is the only place where the white space plays a role in the ABNF, and this is a good question. Do we really need this white space in?
Yeah, but that's not the one on this
ABNF?
slide. That's on this slide. So we'll
Okay.
finish this one first, please.
Okay.
So I think I'm smelling agreement that even though you really probably shouldn't need the star inside the selector, then inside the union, there's no harm in having it there for syntactic uniformity.
Maybe we need to discuss the fact of we allow multiple slice indexes in the union entry. What's your opinion?
I think multiple slices would be fine. Multiple slices, multiple filters, independent indexes, quoted names.
Okay,
Combine all
filters.
those. That's fine. Because each one of those makes a distinct, not distinct, but they make a defined set on that current level of selection. Wildcard selects them all, which makes the others redundant. And descent selectors, we don't have a syntax for it, and it would go beyond the current level. But yeah, I think if we just add filter selector into this, that'd be fine.
Yes. Okay. In fact, I do not have arguments against it to have multiple slice indexes inside, and filter selector needs to get in and is also allowed to be multiply inside.
So can we do this in a separate PR?
Yes, please.
So my takeaway is that we are not changing that production just yet, but we may want to change it later.
Change this later just to add the filters.
And the wildcards. Currently there are no wildcards in there.
Okay.
We are not adding the wildcards.
We are.
I think we were okay with leaving the wildcards for syntactic uniformity, even if it doesn't really make sense.
Okay. I'm not sure we've got consensus on that, because I mentioned it, the syntactic uniformity thing, just so we'd discussed it, but I don't think it's a particularly good idea. If we can omit it, let's omit it.
If we put the wildcard into this list, we need to explain it in the spec why we did it, because users argument, why is the wildcard inside? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
So we need to formulate it's for whatever reason.
Plus, explicitly disallowing it also kind of steers authors, path authors, into building good paths.
I have no opinion on this, whichever. But I smell a general feeling that we'd be better off without them.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. So next slide. Do we need the parentheses in the filter expressions, filter selectors, excuse me? Greg seemed to like them.
I wrote a comment 1 hour or 1.5 hours before our session, and
It's there.
I don't find it, but it doesn't hurt. You can leave it out as backward compatible, and you spare 2 keystrokes. It's minimalistic. There is no syntax, no logical collision. Why not leave it out? Because if you write it, it's in the expression language. It's simply okay. So it's lean, and I think a little better.
This reminds me a bit of the return statement in C. I don't know who of you is old enough to remember that there was a convention that whatever you return is written in parentheses. And when I learned,
Yeah, people still do that in C# too, and it's annoying.
So the question mark is a function name.
Yeah, so when I learned C, I learned it may actually have been required at the time I learned C, but then at some point it stopped being required, and people still did it because they were used to it and considered that to be a convention. And then it took another decade or 2 before people started using that parenthesis. And so not requiring them doesn't mean forcing people to leave it off. In particular, because there will be enough implementations out there that will punish you for leaving them off. So yeah, that's something we have to decide whether we set up people for interoperability failures by allowing it, or whether we are saying, hey, you have to write them to get the best possible interoperability.
I'm putting something into the chat, which is the @foo equals string without the parentheses, and it looks like the question mark's part of the @foo to me. It doesn't look like it's denoting here comes an expression. It looks like all of this is one piece. That's my hesitation.
Yeah, I've got some sympathy for this human readability point, and wondering about if we allow nested filters, will they become unreadable if people omit brackets?
Well, the question mark always is behind the opening bracket. Yes. So if you are used to parsing regular expressions, then this looks really normal for you, because every regular expression begins with open parenthesis question mark colon.
That's a very high bar, you know. I don't think you should have to be able to parse regular expressions.
Yeah. So for me, the most important argument is, do we send people into interoperability failures by allowing that? And so I'm a little bit on the side of saying let's require them, but I don't have a strong opinion.
The other argument I think has been mentioned is the comparison project, and how many implementations already support this abbreviated syntax.
Mhm.
I suspect it's none. So we're kind of departing in philosophy from what we've done so far, in a way.
Yeah. I feel this may be maybe not a release to, but like an enhancement on JSON Path after we release. It could be something like that. Kind of like we have versions of C# or versions of C that come out. Like Carson, you were saying that C eventually stopped requiring those in a later version of the language.
I don't even know whether it
I don't
was
know.
originally required. It was just something that everybody was doing. So I didn't learn C from.
I put another example in the chat of using one of these expressions in a union syntax as well. I don't know. Just something to be able to look at.
If it is a good programming or notation style to use parentheses, it may be also a good notation style to always leave a blank after the question mark. So you maybe see at first sight it's a filter expression. Can you copy your examples with a blank?
That just looks strange to me.
Yes.
Another concern is interoperation. I know that if we allow this compact syntax, then implementations that implement the standard will interoperate. But if we keep the round brackets in, then users will get lucky a lot of the time with other implementations that don't implement the standard. Whereas if we fork off and allow this compact syntax, essentially we're kissing goodbye to the existing implementations.
I know of at least one implementation that allows to leave the parentheses out.
Okay.
I started this without an opinion, but you folks are convincing me you should require the parentheses. The value of compactness is strictly less than readability and expressiveness.
Yeah. If Tim has an opinion on this, we should probably listen to it because he's been rather neutral on most things today.
There is no syntactical benefit. It's only a visual benefit or...
Actually, I'm not sure about that. I haven't sat down and pushed the ABNF into a puzzle generator, so there might even be syntactical benefits, and I think I will do that when things have stabilized enough for that to be a worthwhile exercise.
So, Karsten, do you mean a syntactical benefit of allowing them to be omitted?
No, of the syntactical benefit of having them so they avoid running into ambiguities.
Yeah. It would not be a surprise.
But I don't know that yet.
I think we leave this for another day.
If you find syntactically a bracket, open bracket and a question mark, you can pass until you find the closing bracket or the next comma. I don't see a syntactically benefit anywhere. Only visually, okay, I see the benefit for the user having multiple parenthesis pairs, but it's his own responsibility. He can, whenever he wants, use the
Well, a code of all
parentheses.
kind is read much more often than it's written. So if this has the benefit of increasing readability and interoperability, that seems like a very strong argument to me.
Mhm. Okay, so what shall we do?
I think we leave it for another decision, or leave this for decision for another day. We can always come back to it. Leave them in for now.
Yeah.
Okay,
Carsten,
we have 13 minutes and 3 more slides, so let's try to get through those. The white space issue. The ABNF needs to tell you where white space is allowed, and that's not fun, but that's a feature of ABNF. ABNF is not a two-level parser scanner combination. It's a single level specification. So wherever you want white space to be allowed, you have to put it in. And that, of course, requires a lot of repetition. So this is just to show a random piece of ABNF that I have recently generated. Yeah. So I actually used the capital S as the name of white space to minimize the amount of noise that this generates, but it's still some noise. But I think the more interesting question is, do we have a guideline where white space should be allowed? Certainly not inside strings, but is there any other place where white space should be allowed and be insignificant?
It should be noted that I have an open issue on this number 24.
And what do you think, Greg?
I think it makes sense inside operations or inside operators of a union, like around the brackets and commas and stuff like that, just to kind of increase readability. Inside expressions around operators would be fine. I would not necessarily, well, you could do it between selectors, possibly. One person did comment.
Around the colons?
Right. One person did comment to have multi-line queries for complex. If you wanted to do a multi-line query, you could do that to make it more readable, which would mean that you need white space between selectors as well. So I think there's a lot of places that it could be, but we haven't identified them all yet. I think for right now, we might benefit from just not having them specified at all.
But Carsten told us now
Wait
that
until that discussion's done.
Is the general feeling that that they should be allowed where it doesn't screw up the grammar, or that we should be generous with white space or stingy with white space? I mean,
generous.
There's no doubt that once things get complicated, white space can dramatically improve readability. but is that going to screw up any other aspects of expressions? I mean, what we're doing, are we asking the ABNF constructor to go and do what Carson just showed us there and jam it in everywhere that is reasonable?
Yes,
Yeah.
but not in this PR.
So then the question remains, do we want to remove it where it does show up out of this PR?
Yeah, out of this PR, but I think it's useful to record I hearing a sentiment of the group that being generous with white space where it doesn't screw things up is appropriate.
Yeah, not inside left angle bracket and an equals sign, because that should keep together, but just about everywhere else. Got it.
Perhaps we should do it the other way and be explicit about where it shouldn't be, and then invert that when we're putting it into the ABNF.
Yeah, we don't have the choice. ABNF has been defined in 1976.
No, but let me explain myself a little bit better. What I mean by that is verbally we can explicitly say where we think it shouldn't be, but then the ABNF is obviously where it should be.
Yeah, let's see how we do this. But I think the observation has been we want to sprinkle it over the thing, and except where it actually would hurt, and that has to be done in a future PR.
Yep.
Right, Carson, do we want to remove the white space that's in the current PR?
No.
Okay, so we're just going to leave it as is,
Yeah.
and then come back to it and address it with 24.
Maybe we can add a note
Okay.
that this is to do.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, move along, Karsten.
Can somebody say something to this?
I'll say yes.
Good. So separate PR.
So
Yeah.
breadth first or depth first? Is that the question?
Well, it's
That was
whether
for you,
to,
Glenn.
yeah, it's whether to have for each node, whether to produce that node and then its descendants, or to produce the descendants and then that node, I think.
That's quite different.
But I think from a testing point of view and a predictability point of view, it's good to define the order.
Yes, predictability is a point, and testability also, but this is not for the end user. Testability. So my opinion is to leave it to the implementations. The predictability means that the order is always the same, whatever implementation you are using. But is it really worth the effort? Do users expect exactly that?
Well, I find it nice if I can write test cases without having to do special gymnastics for sorting things before I compare them. So right now, I'm one example where I'm fighting with is when Python puts out XML, it randomly puts out the attributes in any order that depends on a seed that is fed into a random generator when Python starts. So you can be sure that when you run it twice, it's very likely that they will be different. And that really hurts.
We had an earlier discussion about determinism, and I think the consensus was against requiring determinism. Is this a separate issue?
No, that's exactly the same issue.
I think there are actually some frameworks that, like Python, for example, that you absolutely cannot get determinism from it. We've run into this in JSON schema several times too.
Yeah, so for CBOR, we decided it's not a basic requirement to be deterministic, but a specific application can ask for deterministic encoding, and then it is a requirement for implementations that want to support these applications. So I think that's something we can do here as well.
Maybe not a requirement, but extension point and something we tell them would be the favorable.
I think we can have we probably define a deterministic order and then label it with a should. I think that would be fine. That way it's not a requirement.
8259 has these interoperability notes saying, for interoperability, don't do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
You could have a for interoperability note on this.
Yeah, I'd be happy to make it a should. Why don't I have a go at a PR and see if it can gain consensus? And if it gets beaten down, at least we'll have a record of why it got beaten down.
Great.
The other thing about the compliance test suite is that ideally an implementer of a library is going to be writing the code that runs the test suite for their library as well.
Oh, I'm not talking about tests.
So they would be
library.
responsible for that.
I'm talking about tests for applications. Joe Random wants to put a couple of JSON path queries against their server, and they want to see whether the right thing comes out. I think that's really the use case. The other thing is also used.
I think Joe Random is going to have a deep equals operator or something like that that deals with the fact that these things are not deterministic, because they're just not, okay?
Well, he might have a good server that gives stuff to him in deterministic order, and then he can still use it.
Yeah, but then if he changes the underlying server, all his tests break if he hasn't been careful about doing V equals testing and so on. I mean, I think the spec needs to be clear that this is not a thing that is part of the JSON path landscape. It's a good idea. Recommend it. Put a should in, but.
I guess another comment is that when you're actually coding the implementation of the descendant selector, you have to make a decision. It's hard to see how you would, I personally don't see how you would just end up with a non-deterministic implementation. So you have to make a decision, and it's fairly arbitrary. So if the spec gives some guidance, then why not pay that?
This is the argument.
It depends. If you're doing it serially, sure. But if you're running it in parallel, you can send different threads down different branches, and they can come back at different times, and you'll get different results.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got an action here to do a PR on this, but nobody is in favor of ironclad requirement of determinism. We are essentially out of time. Karsten, show us your last slide. I think there's one left.
Yes.
Oh,
no.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so I think we do have we do have the knee-jerk reaction on the term implicit conversions, but it actually came up again with this concept of truthy, and I think we need to understand how we can avoid pulling in implicit conversions through the backdoor here.
No, there is no implicit conversion to Boolean except the existence aspect. If a member or if it exists, the implicit filter expression result is true, otherwise it's false. This is the only implicit conversion to Boolean which should be allowed.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. As a .NET developer, I'm comfortable with that.
As a former Perl victim, I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, so can I have the notes as quickly as possible? So I'm going to have lunch now because it's that time in Germany, and when I'm back from lunch, then I will finish the PR based on what we just discussed, but I need the notes to do that.
Okay. They're pretty rough, Karsten, but they're quite long, so I'll send them to you.
Great.
Tim, what time is it there? What, 4?
Yep.
5?
4. It's just 4:02 a.m. And a good morning to all of you. And by the way, I hate you.
It's 11 here.
Next time I join a working group, I'm going to find it where
at night.
Okay.
So I'm going to go to bed and see you guys on the other side.
Yeah.
Thank you all. That has been a great meeting.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Talk to you
Thanks
later.
again.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.